Hello there, and welcome to a place where time moves differently. Tonight we step away from the rush and noise of everyday life and into one of Earth's most serene theatres, the desert at night. Here, in this vast expanse of sand and silence, we'll discover a world that most people never see. A landscape that transforms completely when the sun disappears below the horizon. We're about to embark on a gentle journey across rolling dunes under a canopy of stars, where every grain of sand tells a story, and every whisper of wind carries secrets from distant places. This is not a race against time or a struggle against nature. Instead, it's an invitation to slow down, to breathe deeply, and to let the ancient rhythm of the desert wash over you like a warm, comforting tide. The desert holds mysteries that reveal themselves only to those willing to listen. Tonight, we'll uncover the hidden life that emerges when darkness falls, the way moonlight sculpts the sand into flowing rivers of silver, and how creatures that seem impossible manage to thrive in this land of extremes. We'll explore how the desert breathes, how it sings, and how it has been shaping the dreams of travelers for thousands of years. If you find peace in these quiet wanderings through nature's most contemplative spaces, feel free to like and subscribe, or simply share a thought in the comments below. It helps others find their way to these moments of calm, one peaceful soul at a time. But for now, let's begin our journey into the heart of the night desert, where silence speaks louder than words, and beauty unfolds in ways you've never imagined. As daylight fades and the last golden rays disappear behind distant ridges, something magical begins to happen in the desert. The harsh, unforgiving landscape of the day transforms into something entirely different. The sand that burned your feet just hours ago now feels cool and welcoming beneath your steps. The air that shimmered with heat waves becomes crisp and clean, carrying scents of sage and distant rain that fell somewhere beyond the horizon. This transformation is not sudden but gradual, like watching a master artist slowly change the colors on an enormous canvas. The sky deepens from pale blue to rich purple, then to the deep indigo of true night stars begin to appear one by one. Tentative at first, then bold and brilliant as they claim their place in the vast dome above. Out here, far from the glow of cities, the night sky reveals itself in all its ancient glory. The silence of the desert at night is unlike any other quiet you've experienced. It's not the absence of sound, but rather the presence of a deeper kind of listening. Your ears are tuned to subtleties you never noticed before, the soft whisper of sand grains shifting in the breeze, the distant call of a night bird, the gentle rustle of desert grass bending in the wind. These sounds don't disturb the peace, but enhance it, creating a symphony so delicate it seems composed by the desert itself. Walking across the dunes in this ethereal light, you begin to understand why desert dwellers speak of the sand as if it were alive. Each dune has its own personality, its own way of catching and holding the moonlight. Some rise in graceful curves that seem to flow like frozen waves. Others stand sharp and angular, their ridges cutting clean lines against the star-filled sky. The patterns in the sand tell stories of wind and weather, of storms that passed through days or weeks ago, leaving their signatures in ripples and ridges that stretch as far as the eye can see. The moon becomes your companion on this journey, casting everything in silver and shadow. When it's full, the desert takes on an otherworldly quality, almost like walking through a dream made of light and silence. The sand glows with a soft luminescence, and you can see for miles across the undulating landscape. Distant mountains appear as dark silhouettes against the lighter sky, their peaks touching the stars like ancient monuments reaching toward infinity. But it's not just the beauty that makes the night desert so captivating. It's the sense of timelessness that settles over everything. Out here, you could be walking in the same footsteps as travelers from centuries past caravans following trade routes that connected distant civilizations. Nomads who knew every star by name and could navigate by the subtlest changes in the sand patterns, explorers seeking something they couldn't quite name. but knew they would recognize when they found it. The desert has always been a place of contemplation and discovery. Ancient cultures saw it as a testing ground for the spirit, a place where one could shed the unnecessary complications of daily life and connect with something more fundamental. The vast emptiness that might seem intimidating at first reveals itself to be full of life and meaning for those who take the time to look and listen. As you crest each dune, a new vista opens before you. Sometimes it's an endless sea of sand stretching to the horizon. Other times it's an unexpected oasis of rocks and desert plants that have found a way to thrive in this challenging environment. Each view is unique, yet all share that quality of timeless beauty that makes you want to pause and simply absorb the moment. The creatures of the night desert begin to emerge as your eyes adjust to the darkness. A fox with enormous ears picks its way delicately across the sand, pausing to listen for sounds you cannot hear. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls from its perch on a lone cactus. Small lizards dart between the shadows, their movements quick and purposeful. These animals have adapted to desert life in remarkable ways, becoming active when the temperature drops and the hunting is better. Even the plants here tell stories of resilience and adaptation. Cacti that store water in their thick stems for months or years. Desert roses that bloom only after rare rainfalls, carpeting the sand with unexpected color. Grasses that seem dead during the day, but come alive in the cool night air, releasing fragrances that attract night-flying insects. Everything in the desert has learned to make the most of the brief, precious hours when conditions are favorable. The wind plays a constant role in shaping this landscape, and at night its voice changes. During the day, it might howl and rage, driving sand before it in stinging clouds. But in the evening hours, it often settles into a gentle, steady flow that creates the most soothing sound imaginable. It's the desert's lullaby, a constant whisper that speaks of patience and endurance, and the slow, inevitable changes that shape all things given enough time. As you walk deeper into this nocturnal world, you begin to notice how your own rhythms change. Your breathing slows and deepens. Your steps become more measured and deliberate. The urgent thoughts that filled your mind when you first arrived start to fade, replaced by a growing sense of peace and connection. The desert has a way of putting things in perspective, reminding you that many of the things you worry about are small and temporary compared to the vast sweep of time and space that surrounds you. The temperature continues to drop as the night progresses, and you pull your jacket closer around you. But the cold is not uncomfortable. It's refreshing after the heat of the day, and it carries with it the promise that morning will come, bringing its own beauty and its own gifts. The desert teaches patience above all else. Everything happens in its own time, according to rhythms far older and more reliable than the hurried pace of modern life above you. The stars wheel slowly across the sky in their ancient patterns. Out here, away from light pollution, you can see the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon like a river of light. Shooting stars streak across the darkness, brief and brilliant reminders of the cosmic dance that surrounds our small planet. The moon traces its path among the constellations, sometimes full and bright, sometimes a delicate crescent, but always present, always constant. The sand beneath your feet tells its own story with each step. Sometimes it's firm and packed, holding your weight easily. Other times it's soft and yielding, allowing your feet to sink slightly with each step. The different textures speak of different winds, different weather patterns, different moments in the desert's long history. You become aware that you're walking through time itself, across layers of sand that have been deposited and shaped by countless storms and seasons. This is where we pause in our journey, though the night is far from over. The desert spreads endlessly before us, holding more secrets and more beauty than we could discover in a single evening. The dunes continue their gentle rise and fall toward the horizon, each one catching the starlight in its own way, each one offering its own perspective on this vast and ancient landscape. The wind continues its soft conversation with the sand, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls to its mate. The stars shine down with the same light that has guided travelers for millennia, and the moon continues its stately progress across the sky. Everything moves according to its own perfect timing, unhurried and eternal, arid and eternal. As we continue our gentle traverse through this moonlit wilderness, the desert reveals more of its nocturnal personality. The dunes ahead seem to breathe with a life of their own, their surfaces shifting subtly in the starlight as microscopic avalanches of sand cascade down their faces. Each grain finds its place through gravity's patient pull, creating patterns that will exist for hours or days before the next wind erases them and begins the process anew. The silence here has weight and texture. It presses gently against your eardrums, not as an absence, but as a presence unto itself. Within this quietude, the smallest sounds become amplified and meaningful. The soft crunch of sand compacting under your footsteps creates a rhythm that matches your heartbeat. A distant coyote's howl rises and falls, like a question posed to the night sky, answered only by the whisper of wind across stone and sand. Moving deeper into this landscape of dreams, you notice how the moonlight plays tricks with distance and perspective. What appears to be a nearby rock formation reveals itself to be a distant mesa when you climb higher shadows that seem solid and permanent shift and change as clouds drift across the face of the moon. The desert teaches you to trust not just what you see, but what you feel and sense in ways that go beyond ordinary perception. The sand itself becomes a canvas for the night's artistry. Wind patterns create intricate designs that spiral and flow like calligraphy written in an ancient language. Ripple marks spread across flat areas between dunes, each ridge catching and holding shadows that create depth and texture in the pale light. These natural sculptures appear and disappear with each shift in the breeze. Temporary masterpieces that exist for moments or hours before transforming into something entirely new. Here and there, hardy desert plants emerge from the sand like sculptures crafted by time itself. A twisted Joshua tree stands sentinel against the star-filled sky, its spiky arms reaching upward in what seems like a gesture of celebration or supplication. Barrel cacti huddle in family groups, their round forms storing precious water against the inevitable return of scorching daylight. Each plant represents decades or centuries of patient adaptation, of learning to thrive where others would merely survive. The night air carries stories from far beyond the visible horizon. Scents of distant blooming flowers mix with the clean smell of cooling sand and the faint mineral tang of ancient rocks. Sometimes there's a hint of moisture that speaks of dew forming on cactus spines, or the green smell of life that emerges from hidden springs miles away. Your nose becomes attuned to these subtle messages, reading the desert's mood like pages in an invisible book. As you walk, the soft sand sometimes gives way to patches of harder ground where the desert floor is composed of packed earth and small stones. These areas create slightly different sounds under your feet, a firmer percussion that contrasts with the whispered footfalls on pure sand-rocky outcroppings appear as dark shapes against the lighter dunes, their surfaces worn smooth by millennia of wind and rare but powerful rainstorms. The creatures of the night continue to make their presence known in gentle ways. A kit fox appears briefly at the crest of a distant dune, its silhouette delicate and alert before it disappears back into the maze of sandhills. The soft flutter of bat wings passes overhead, almost felt rather than heard, as these nocturnal hunters pursue insects you cannot see. An owl's call echoes from somewhere among the rocks, a haunting sound that seems to carry for miles in the thin, clear air. Walking through this ethereal landscape, you begin to understand the desert's relationship with time itself. Everything here operates on a different schedule than the hurried world you've left behind. Plants grow slowly, conserving energy for the brief moments when conditions are perfect for rapid expansion. Animals move with deliberate efficiency, wasting no motion or energy on unnecessary activities. Even the geological processes work at their own patient pace, reshaping the landscape grain by grain, season by season, century by century. The moon continues its arc across the star-studded dome above, and as it moves, the entire desert transforms. Shadows shift and dance, revealing new contours and hiding others. A ridge that was clearly visible an hour ago now blends seamlessly with the dune behind it. A valley that seemed shallow in the earlier moonlight now appears deep and mysterious as the angle of illumination changes. The desert reinvents itself continuously, never quite the same from one moment to the next. Temperature becomes another character in this nocturnal story. The air grows steadily cooler as the night progresses, creating gentle currents that flow down from the higher elevations and pool in the valleys between dunes. These thermal currents carry with them the accumulated coolness of stone and sand that has been radiating heat into space since sunset. You can feel these invisible rivers of cooler air as they brush against your skin. Natural air conditioning that makes the desert night so refreshing after the blazing heat of day. The quality of light shifts subtly as well. What begins as the bright silver of early moonlight gradually becomes softer and more golden as atmospheric conditions change. Sometimes thin clouds drift across the moon, creating a diffused glow that makes the entire landscape seem to luminesce from within. During these moments, the boundary between earth and sky becomes less distinct, and you feel as though you're walking through a world made of light and shadow rather than solid matter. Your footprints trail behind you in the sand, creating a temporary record of your passage through this timeless place. But even as you make these marks, you know they won't last long. The next wind will smooth them away. The next storm will reshape the very dunes you've crossed. This impermanence doesn't sadden, but rather adds to the desert's profound beauty. Nothing here clings to permanence. Everything flows and changes, according to forces larger than any individual presence. Small miracles reveal themselves to those who move slowly enough to notice a spider's web stretched between cactus spines, beaded with dew that wasn't there an hour ago. The delicate tracks of a kangaroo rat, perfectly preserved in a patch of fine sand, telling the story of its nocturnal foraging expedition. A single flower blooming from what appeared to be lifeless ground, its petals glowing pale white in the moonlight, opening only during these precious cool hours. The horizon shimmers with possibility in every direction. Behind you, the dunes you've crossed fade into the blue-black distance, their forms softened by the atmospheric haze that makes distant objects appear ethereal and dreamlike. Ahead, new configurations of sand and shadow promise different perspectives and fresh discoveries. To either side, the desert stretches away toward mountain ranges that appear as dark serrations against the lighter sky, their peaks catching starlight like ancient crowns. Water becomes a precious concept here, not just as a physical necessity, but as a metaphor for all the hidden resources that sustain life in seemingly impossible places. You know that beneath the sand, roots extend deep into the earth, seeking moisture that fell as rain perhaps years ago. Underground streams flow along buried rock formations, supporting oases that exist like green jewels scattered across the vast expanse of sand and stone. The desert night reveals itself as a masterclass in adaptation and resilience. Every living thing you encounter has found its own unique solution to the challenges of extreme heat, scarce water, and intense solar radiation. These solutions, refined over thousands of generations, create a complex web of interdependence that sustains this entire ecosystem. The desert teaches that survival is not just about individual strength, but about finding one's place in the larger pattern of life. Sound travels differently here than in other environments. The dry air and lack of vegetation create acoustic conditions where certain sounds carry for extraordinary distances, while others seem muffled and close. A coyote's howl from miles away arrives crystal clear, while your own breathing sounds intimate and immediate. This acoustic landscape adds another layer to the desert's sensory richness, creating a three-dimensional experience that engages all your senses simultaneously. As the night deepens, the temperature differential between the cooling sand and the warmer air creates gentle updrafts that you can feel as subtle changes in air pressure against your skin. These thermal columns sometimes carry the sense of distant places, brief olfactory messages from ecosystems you cannot see, but that share this same vast sky. The desert reveals itself as connected to distant mountains, far-off forests, and even the ocean beyond the horizon through these invisible currents of air. The stars above continue their ancient dance, and you begin to recognize some of the patterns that have guided travelers for millennia. The Big Dipper pours its imaginary contents toward the horizon. Orion strides across the southern sky, his belt pointing toward mysteries beyond the visible world. The North Star holds its steady position, a reliable beacon that has remained constant through centuries of human wandering. These celestial landmarks connect you to every person who has ever looked up at the night sky and wondered about their place in the vast cosmos. Here in this moment, suspended between the infinite above and the ancient below, the desert night continues to unfold its quiet magic. Each breath brings new awareness. Each step forward reveals fresh perspectives on this landscape that seems both utterly foreign and deeply familiar. The journey continues, measured not in miles, but in moments of wonder, not in destinations reached, but in the growing sense of peace that comes from moving in harmony with rhythms far older and more patient than the hurried pace of ordinary time. The desert's breathing becomes more apparent as you settle into this slower rhythm of exploration. Each dune exhales cool air that has been stored in its shaded depths throughout the day, while drawing in the warmer currents that rise from sun-baked surfaces still releasing their accumulated heat. This gentle circulation creates microclimates that shift and change as you move through the landscape, pockets of different temperatures and humidity levels that support their own unique communities of life. Moving across a particularly expansive flat area between towering dunes, you notice how the sand here has been sculpted into intricate patterns by crosswinds. Parallel ridges run in one direction, while perpendicular waves create a checkerboard effect that speaks of competing air currents, meeting and negotiating their differences in the language of shifting grains. These natural patterns possess a mathematical precision that would be impossible to create by human design, yet they emerge spontaneously from the simple interaction of wind and sand over time. The night sky deepens further, and more subtle celestial features become visible to your dark-adapted eyes. The zodiacal light, that faint pyramid of illumination that rises from the horizon before dawn, begins to make its presence known. Satellite tracks occasionally streak across the star field, modern additions to the ancient light show overhead. Sometimes a meteor blazes through the atmosphere, its brief, brilliant trail a reminder of the cosmic debris that constantly rains down upon our planet, most of it burning up harmlessly in the protective envelope of air that surrounds us. In this profound quiet, your other senses compensate for the reduced visual information. Your skin becomes acutely aware of subtle changes in air temperature and humidity. A slight increase in moisture might signal the presence of underground water, while a particular quality of dryness speaks of deep sand and distance from any hidden springs. Your nose detects the faint alkaline scent of mineral deposits, the green smell of hardy grasses, and occasionally the musky odor of some nocturnal creature that has passed this way recently. The texture of the ground beneath your feet tells an ongoing story of geological processes. Here the sand is fine and uniform, composed of quartz grains worn smooth by countless miles of travel on ancient winds. There it becomes coarser, mixed with fragments of feldspar and mica that catch the moonlight like tiny mirrors scattered across the surface. Rocky patches reveal themselves through the different sound your footsteps make, a more solid percussion that speaks of bedrock not far below the sandy surface. Wildlife signs become more apparent as your awareness sharpens. The delicate scratches left by a sidewinder's passage create S-shaped patterns in the sand, a signature as distinctive as any human fingerprint. Small circular depressions mark the spots where kangaroo rats have dug for seeds, their excavations precise and purposeful. Occasionally, you encounter the remains of a coyote's meal, clean bones scattered and bleached white by the desert sun, now serving as waypoints in this vast navigation puzzle. The wind patterns shift as the night progresses, creating new symphonies of sound as air moves through different obstacles and openings. A distant rock formation creates a low harmonic as wind passes through its natural arches. Nearby, a cluster of barrel cacti produces tiny whistling notes as air moves between their spines. These natural wind instruments play compositions that change with every shift in direction or velocity, an ever-evolving concert performed for an audience of stars and sand. Temperature inversions begin to form as the night air cools, creating layers of different density that can bend sound in unexpected ways. Voices or calls that should fade with distance sometimes seem to hang in the air longer than expected, while sounds that should carry far remain surprisingly localized. This acoustic lensing adds another element of mystery to the desert night, making it seem as though the landscape itself is playing with your perceptions. The moon reaches its zenith, and the desert transforms once again under its direct gaze. Shadows become shorter and more defined, revealing details that were hidden in the earlier slanted light. The surfaces of dunes show their true texture, revealing wind patterns from storms that passed through days or weeks ago. Rocky outcroppings display their layered construction, telling stories of ancient seas and changing climates written in stone. Plant life reveals its nighttime secrets as the hours pass. Cactus flowers that remained tightly closed during the heat of day begin to open, their pale petals unfolding to attract night-flying pollinators. The night-blooming cereus, if you're fortunate enough to encounter one, displays its magnificent single-night bloom, a flower so spectacular that people travel hundreds of miles for the chance to witness its brief appearance. These botanical events remind you that the desert operates on its own calendar, with celebrations and ceremonies that occur regardless of human observation. The sand continues its endless redistribution, individual grains making journeys that might take them across continents over geological time. Some of the sand beneath your feet may have originated in distant mountains, ground down by eons of weather, and carried here by winds that have long since changed direction. Other grains might be local products, fragments of nearby rocks broken down by the extreme temperature variations that characterize desert environments. As you pause on the crest of a particularly high dune, the view in all directions reveals the true scale of this landscape. Dune fields extend beyond the horizon, their crests creating flowing lines that seem to pulse with life in the shifting light. Between them, darker areas mark valleys and flats where different communities of plants and animals have established themselves. The overall pattern resembles a vast ocean frozen at the moment of greatest turbulence, with waves and swells preserved in sand instead of water. The quality of silence continues to evolve throughout the night. What began as the simple absence of human noise has become a rich tapestry of subtle natural sounds that you never would have noticed in a busier environment. The soft patter of sand grains settling after being disturbed by your passage. The almost inaudible rustle of a desert mouse moving through dried grass. The distant crack of cooling rock contracting as it releases the day's accumulated heat into the star-filled void above. Night-flying insects begin to make their presence known as the temperature reaches its most comfortable range for their activities. A sphinx moth hovers near a night-blooming flower, its wings beating so rapidly they create a faint, humming sound. Beetles emerge from their daytime hiding places to search for food and mates, their movements creating tiny disturbances in the sand that mark their passage. These small dramas of survival and reproduction continue all around you, mostly invisible but occasionally revealed by careful observation. The desert's relationship with water becomes more apparent during these cool hours. Dew begins to form on cactus spines and rock surfaces, precious moisture that many desert creatures depend upon for survival. Some plants have evolved specialized structures to capture and channel this dew to their roots, turning the cool night air into a vital resource. The slight increase in humidity that accompanies dew formation changes the way scents travel, making the desert's olfactory landscape richer and more complex. Your own relationship with this environment continues to deepen as the night progresses. The initial sense of being a visitor in an alien landscape gradually gives way to a feeling of belonging, as if you're remembering something you once knew but had forgotten. The desert's rhythms begin to synchronize with your own breathing and heartbeat, creating a harmony that speaks to something fundamental in human nature, some ancient memory of open spaces and star-filled skies. The interplay between light and shadow creates an ever-changing gallery of natural sculptures. A fallen log becomes a sleeping dinosaur in the slanted moonlight. Wind-carved rocks transform into abstract art installations that would be the envy of any human sculptor. Sand drifts create flowing forms that seem to capture movement itself, freezing the desert's dance in temporary poses that will dissolve and reform with the next significant wind. Time loses its ordinary meaning in this environment where change happens so slowly that it's invisible to short human lifespans, yet so constantly that no moment is ever quite like any other. The dunes you're crossing tonight have been forming and reforming for thousands of years, yet the exact configuration of sand and shadow you're experiencing has never existed before and will never exist again in precisely this way. The night deepens further still, and with it comes an even greater sense of the desert's timeless character. Here, surrounded by sand and stars and silence, you begin to understand why this landscape has called to human souls for millennia, offering something that cannot be found in more crowded or hurried places. The desert night becomes a teacher, its lessons written in starlight and delivered in whispers of wind across endless dunes that stretch toward tomorrow's dawn. The desert's nocturnal symphony grows richer as the hours pass, with each instrument in this natural orchestra finding its voice at precisely the right moment. A gentle breeze carries the whispered conversations of sand grains as they resettle into new configurations, their microscopic avalanches creating patterns that will exist until the next wind erases them completely. The sound is barely perceptible, more felt than heard, like the earth itself murmuring secrets that only the most patient listeners can understand. Moving through this landscape of silver and shadow, you begin to notice how the desert's architecture changes with your perspective. What appeared from a distance to be a simple ridge of sand reveals itself upon closer approach to be a complex system of interconnected dunes, each with its own personality and microclimate. Some faces catch the moonlight directly, glowing with an almost supernatural luminescence, while others remain deep in shadow, their surfaces dark and mysterious as pools of liquid night. The creatures that call this place home continue to reveal themselves in subtle ways. A fennec fox appears briefly at the edge of your vision, its enormous ears silhouetted against the star-filled sky, before it vanishes back into the maze of sand and stone. These desert dwellers have mastered the art of existing between visibility and concealment, appearing just long enough to remind you that this seemingly empty landscape teems with life adapted to its harsh rhythms. Plant life takes on an almost sculptural quality in the moonlight. A solitary ocotillo stands like a many-armed dancer frozen mid-performance, its spiny branches reaching toward the stars in graceful curves that speak of decades spent learning to bend with desert winds rather than break against them. Nearby, a cluster of barrel cacti huddle together like ancient philosophers engaged in some eternal discussion, their ribbed surfaces creating intricate patterns of light and shadow that shift with every passing cloud. The air itself becomes a storyteller, carrying messages from distant parts of this vast ecosystem. Sometimes it brings the faint scent of creosote bush, that distinctive smell that many consider the signature fragrance of the American Southwest. Other times, it carries hints of minerals dissolved from ancient rock formations, or the green smell of hidden springs that support small oases scattered throughout this sea of sand. Your nose learns to read these atmospheric letters, decoding information about places and processes you cannot see, but that share this same night sky. As you climb the face of a particularly steep dune, the sand beneath your feet demonstrates the complex physics of granular materials. Sometimes it supports your weight easily. The grains lock together in stable configurations that hold firm under pressure. Other times it flows like liquid around your boots, each step creating small cascades that whisper down the slope behind you. These variations speak of different wind patterns, different moisture levels, different ages of deposition that have created layers within layers in this seemingly uniform landscape. The temperature continues its gentle descent, creating thermal currents that you can feel as subtle changes in air pressure against your exposed skin. These invisible rivers of cool air flow down from the higher elevations like mountain streams made of atmosphere, pooling in the valleys between dunes and creating microclimates that support their own unique communities of life. A slight depression in the sand might harbor enough extra moisture to support a small garden of desert wildflowers, their seeds waiting years for the perfect combination of temperature and humidity to trigger their brief, brilliant bloom. Sound travels through this environment in ways that seem to defy ordinary acoustics. The dry air and sparse vegetation create conditions where certain frequencies carry for extraordinary distances, while others seem muffled and intimate. A coyote's song from miles away arrives with crystalline clarity, each note distinct and haunting as it echoes off distant rock formations. Meanwhile, your own footsteps create a private percussion that seems to exist in a bubble of sound that moves with you across the flowing landscape. The moon continues its stately progress across the star-studded dome above, and as its angle changes, the entire desert reinvents itself. Ridges that were clearly defined an hour ago now blend seamlessly with the dunes behind them. Valleys that seemed shallow in the earlier light now appear deep and mysterious as shadows shift and reorganize themselves according to the changing illumination. The desert becomes a master of disguise, never quite the same from one moment to the next, always revealing new aspects of its inexhaustible beauty. Wildlife tracks in the sand become easier to read as your eyes adjust fully to the subtle gradations of light and shadow. The distinctive parallel lines left by a sidewinder's passage tell the story of efficient locomotion across loose surfaces. Small circular excavations mark places where kangaroo rats have searched for seeds, their digging precise and economical. Occasionally you encounter the delicate prints of a kit fox, each paw pad clearly defined in the fine sand, creating a temporary record of some nocturnal hunting expedition. The quality of silence deepens as the night progresses, becoming not merely the absence of noise, but a presence unto itself. Within this profound quiet, the smallest sounds become amplified and meaningful. The soft whisper of your jacket brushing against itself as you move, the gentle exhalation of air from sand compressed under your weight, the distant settling of cooling rock as it contracts and releases the day's accumulated heat into the infinite reservoir of space above. Here and there, hardy desert plants reveal their nighttime transformations. Flowers that remained tightly closed during the blazing heat of day begin to unfold their petals, releasing fragrances designed to attract night-flying pollinators. The 4 o'clock flower lives up to its name, opening as the afternoon heat begins to fade and continuing its bloom through the cool hours of darkness. These botanical events occur on schedules entirely independent of human timekeeping, following rhythms that have been refined over millions of years of desert evolution. The sand beneath your feet tells stories of vast migrations and transformations. Some grains may have traveled thousands of miles, beginning their journey in distant mountain ranges before being ground down by weather and carried here by winds that have long since changed direction. Others might be recent additions to the landscape, fragments of nearby rock, broken off by the extreme temperature variations that characterize desert environments. Each grain represents a chapter in the ongoing geological novel, that this landscape continues to write with every passing storm and season. Water becomes both memory and promise in this environment where moisture is precious beyond calculation. The slight increase in humidity that comes with falling temperatures hints at the dew that will form before dawn, coating cactus spines and rock surfaces with droplets that many desert creatures depend upon for survival. Some plants have evolved elaborate mechanisms for harvesting this atmospheric moisture, turning their entire surface into collection systems that channel every available drop toward their roots. The night sky overhead serves as both compass and calendar for those who know how to read its ancient messages. Constellations wheel slowly across the heavens in patterns that have guided travelers for millennia. The Big Dipper pours its imaginary contents toward the horizon, while Cassiopeia spreads her distinctive W across the northern sky. These celestial landmarks connect you to every human who has ever looked up at the night sky and used the stars to find their way across unknown territory. Moving across a particularly flat expanse between towering dunes, you encounter sand that has been sculpted by crosswinds into intricate geometric patterns. Parallel ridges run in one direction, while perpendicular ripples create a natural checkerboard that speaks of competing air currents meeting and negotiating their differences through the patient rearrangement of countless individual grains. These designs possess a mathematical precision that emerges spontaneously from the simple physics of wind and sand interacting over time. The desert's breathing becomes more apparent as thermal currents strengthen with the increasing temperature differential between cooling sand and warmer air. These gentle circulations create updrafts that you can feel as subtle changes in pressure against your skin, invisible columns of moving air that sometimes carry the sense of distant ecosystems. A brief whiff of sage from hidden springs miles away, or the mineral tang of exposed rock formations, arrives as an olfactory message from places you cannot see, but that share this same vast night. Small dramas of survival and adaptation continue to unfold all around you, mostly invisible, but occasionally revealed to careful observation. A desert mouse emerges briefly from its burrow, its movements quick and purposeful as it searches for seeds scattered by the wind. Night-flying insects begin their own hunting expeditions, drawn by the cooler temperatures and the opening of nocturnal flowers. These creatures have evolved remarkable strategies for conserving water and avoiding the desert's extremes, turning what seems like a hostile environment into a perfectly calibrated home. The interplay between geology and climate becomes more apparent as you traverse different types of terrain. Areas where the sand is mixed with gravel create different acoustic properties, producing subtle changes in the sound of your footsteps. Rocky outcroppings that seemed uniform from a distance reveal themselves to be complex geological stories written in stone, their layered constructions speaking of ancient seas, changing climates, and the slow but relentless processes that shape the Earth's surface over deep time. As the night reaches its deepest point, the desert achieves a kind of equilibrium that seems to suspend ordinary time. The temperature stabilizes at its coolest point, creating ideal conditions for the nocturnal community that emerges only during these precious hours. This is when the desert truly comes alive, when the harsh extremes of day give way to the gentle rhythms that have sustained life in this challenging environment for countless generations. The moon reaches its highest point in its arc across the sky, casting the shortest and most defined shadows of the night. Under this direct illumination, every detail of the landscape becomes clearly visible, revealing the true complexity of what appears from a distance to be simple emptiness. The surfaces of dunes show their intricate texture, created by wind patterns from storms that passed through days or weeks ago. Each grain of sand seems to glow with its own internal light, creating a carpet of tiny stars spread across the flowing terrain. The horizon shimmers with possibility in every direction, each distant ridge promising new discoveries and fresh perspectives on this ancient landscape. Behind you, the dunes you've traversed fade into blue-black obscurity, their forms softened by atmospheric haze that makes even recent footprints seem like memories from another lifetime. Ahead, new configurations of sand and shadow beckon with the quiet insistence of unexplored territory, each crest hiding valleys and formations that exist in their own perfect solitude until the moment you arrive to witness them. Moving through this ethereal terrain, you become acutely aware of how the desert manipulates your perception of scale and distance. What appears to be a nearby formation reveals itself to be miles away when you climb higher and gain a different vantage point. Conversely, distant mountains that seemed impossibly far suddenly loom large and immediate as atmospheric conditions shift and clarity increases. The desert teaches patience with these gentle deceptions, reminding you that understanding comes not from rushing toward quick answers, but from allowing truth to reveal itself in its own time. The wind patterns continue to evolve as the night deepens, creating new acoustic landscapes with each shift in direction and velocity. A cluster of weathered rocks becomes a natural wind chime as air moves through the spaces between them, producing haunting tones that seem to carry messages from some ancient civilization. Nearby, the hollow stems of dead ocotillo plants create their own musical contributions, whistling softly as desert breezes find their way through these organic flutes. This symphony of stone and plant matter plays compositions that exist only in the moment, never to be repeated in exactly the same way. Your footsteps create their own rhythm against this backdrop of natural sound, each step a small percussion note in the larger composition of the desert night. Sometimes the sand is firm and supportive, producing barely audible whispers as grains shift slightly under your weight. Other times, it yields more dramatically, creating soft cascades that flow down the faces of dunes like granular waterfalls, their gentle rushing sound a reminder of the liquid properties that sand can exhibit under the right conditions. The creatures of the night continue their ancient routines all around you, their presence felt more than seen in this world of shadow and starlight. A great horned owl calls from somewhere among the rocky outcroppings, its deep voice carrying across miles of open space with remarkable clarity. The call is answered from a different direction, creating a conversation that spans vast distances and speaks to the interconnected nature of life in this seemingly empty landscape. These vocal exchanges have been happening here for thousands of years, a dialogue between creatures perfectly adapted to find each other across the vastness of the desert night. Temperature becomes an increasingly important element in your experience as the cooling continues. The air develops layers of different density that you can feel as you move through them, creating a three-dimensional map of thermal conditions that changes constantly as heat radiates away into space. Cool air flows down from elevated areas like invisible streams, pooling in depressions and creating microclimates that support their own unique communities of adapted life. Your skin becomes sensitive to these subtle variations, reading the desert's thermal story through nerve endings that have become attuned to nuances you never noticed in more temperate environments. The quality of light continues to transform as atmospheric conditions change throughout the night. Thin clouds occasionally drift across the face of the moon, creating periods of softer, more diffused illumination that makes the entire landscape seem to glow from within. During these moments, the boundary between earth and sky becomes less distinct, and you feel as though you're moving through a world constructed entirely of luminous atmosphere rather than solid matter. The effect is dreamlike and profound, suggesting that reality itself might be more fluid and malleable than everyday experience usually allows us to perceive. Plant life reveals more of its nighttime adaptations as the hours pass. Desert marigolds that appeared lifeless during the day begin to release their fragrance into the cool air, creating invisible trails of scent that guide night-flying insects to their nectar. A night-blooming cereus, if you're fortunate enough to encounter one during its single evening of flowering, displays petals that seem to glow with their own internal light. A botanical lighthouse that operates for just a few precious hours before closing forever. These floral events occur according to calendars that have nothing to do with human timekeeping, following rhythms established over millennia of evolution in this challenging environment. The sand continues its endless redistribution, each grain making journeys that might carry it across continents over geological timescales. Some of the material beneath your feet originated in mountain ranges that no longer exist, ground down by eons of weather, and transported here by wind patterns that shifted long before humans walked the earth. Other particles are recent additions to the landscape, fragments broken from nearby formations by the extreme temperature variations that characterize desert life. This constant circulation of matter connects you to deep time, to processes that operate on scales that dwarf human experience, yet create the very ground you walk upon. As you pause at the summit of a particularly impressive dune, the view in all directions reveals the true majesty of this landscape. Sand seas extend beyond the limits of vision, their undulating surfaces creating patterns that seem to pulse with life under the shifting light of moon and stars. The overall effect resembles a vast ocean captured at the moment of perfect stillness, with swells and waves preserved in granular form rather than water. Between the major dune fields, darker areas mark valleys and flats, where different ecological communities have established themselves according to subtle variations in soil composition, drainage patterns, and exposure to prevailing winds. The acoustic properties of this environment continue to surprise and delight as your hearing becomes more sensitive to subtle variations in sound transmission. Conversations between coyotes miles apart arrive with startling clarity, their calls bouncing off distant rock formations and arriving from unexpected directions. Meanwhile, sounds that should carry far seem to be absorbed by the sand and sparse vegetation, creating pockets of acoustic intimacy that move with you across the flowing terrain. This manipulation of sound adds another layer to the desert's sensory complexity, creating an auditory landscape as varied and interesting as the visual panorama that surrounds you. Night-flying insects begin to emerge in greater numbers as conditions become optimal for their activities. A sphinx moth appears near a blooming desert willow, its wings beating so rapidly they create a barely audible humming that seems to harmonize with the gentle whisper of wind through the tree's narrow leaves. Beetles venture forth from their daytime hiding places, their movements creating tiny disturbances in the sand that mark their passage like signatures, written in a language only other desert dwellers can read. These small dramas of survival and reproduction continue constantly around you, mostly invisible but occasionally revealed by patient observation and careful attention to the subtle signs that mark the presence of adapted life. The desert's relationship with water becomes increasingly apparent during these cool hours, when humidity levels rise slightly and dew begins to form on exposed surfaces. Many desert plants have evolved specialized structures specifically designed to capture and channel this atmospheric moisture to their root systems, turning the cool night air into a vital resource for survival. Barrel cacti develop tiny droplets along their ridge surfaces, while the spines of prickly pear cacti act as collection points that funnel precious water toward the plant's base. These adaptations represent millions of years of evolutionary refinement, turning the desert's harsh conditions into opportunities for those clever enough to exploit them. Your own relationship with this environment continues to deepen and evolve as the night progresses. What began as a sense of being a visitor in an alien landscape gradually transforms into something approaching belonging, as if you're remembering skills and awareness that your species once possessed but largely forgot during the transition to more settled ways of living. Your breathing synchronizes with the desert's own respiratory rhythms. Your heartbeat finds harmony with the subtle pulses of thermal circulation, and your movements begin to match the patient, economical gestures that characterize successful desert dwellers. The interplay between light and shadow creates an ever-changing exhibition of natural sculpture that would be impossible to replicate through human artistry. Wind-carved rocks take on the appearance of abstract masterpieces, their surfaces polished smooth by millennia of sandblasting that has revealed the hidden beauty within ordinary stone-fallen logs become sleeping giants in the slanted moonlight, while accumulated sand drifts create flowing forms that seem to capture movement itself, freezing the desert's eternal dance in temporary poses that will dissolve and reform with the next significant weather event. Time loses its ordinary meaning in this environment where geological processes operate on scales that make human lifespans seem like brief flickers of consciousness in an eternal story of transformation and adaptation. The dunes you're crossing tonight have been forming and reforming for thousands of years, shaped by wind patterns and weather systems that have changed repeatedly over the centuries. Yet the exact configuration of sand and starlight you're experiencing has never existed before and will never exist again in precisely this combination, making each moment simultaneously ancient and completely unique. The night deepens further still, bringing with it an even greater sense of the desert's timeless character and profound significance as a teacher of patience, adaptation, and the kind of resilience that emerges only from complete acceptance of challenging conditions. Here, surrounded by silence and stars and the gentle whisper of wind across endless expanses of sand, you begin to understand why this landscape has called to human souls throughout history, offering lessons that cannot be learned in more comfortable or predictable environments. The desert night becomes a meditation on impermanence and endurance, on the way that individual elements can be simultaneously fragile and indestructible, depending on the timescale from which you observe them. Each grain of sand is temporary and mobile, subject to constant redistribution by forces beyond its control. Yet collectively, these countless individual particles create formations that have persisted for millennia, shaping the very climate patterns that determine where rain will fall and rivers will flow across vast regions of the continent. As the hours continue their stately progression toward dawn, the desert maintains its perfect equilibrium between extremes, demonstrating through its very existence that life not only can survive, but can flourish in conditions that initially seem impossible. Every creature, every plant, every geological formation you encounter represents a successful solution to the challenges posed by this environment, a testament to the creativity and persistence that characterize life's response to adversity. The moon continues its ancient journey across the star-filled dome above, and with each degree of its movement, the entire landscape transforms once again, revealing new aspects of its inexhaustible beauty and reminding you that the desert's greatest gift is not any single vista or moment, but rather the ongoing revelation that comes from moving through it with patience, attention, and the kind of open awareness that allows you to receive whatever lessons it chooses to offer. OCs to offer. The stars overhead begin their subtle shift toward the western horizon, marking the progression of night toward its deepest point. Here in this realm between waking and dreaming, the desert reveals secrets that exist only during these precious hours, when the harsh extremes of day give way to the gentle rhythms that have sustained life in this challenging environment for countless generations. The temperature reaches its coolest point, creating perfect conditions for the nocturnal community that emerges when the sun's tyranny finally ends. Moving across a stretch of particularly fine sand, you notice how each footstep creates a small depression that fills immediately with loose grains flowing like liquid around your boots. The physics of granular materials becomes apparent as some areas support your weight easily, while others yield dramatically, creating miniature avalanches that whisper down the slopes behind you. These variations speak of different moisture levels, different compaction patterns, different histories of wind and weather that have shaped each square meter of this flowing landscape according to its own unique story. The acoustic environment continues to evolve as thermal currents strengthen with the increasing temperature differential between cooling sand and the warmer air that rises from surfaces still releasing their accumulated heat. Sound waves bend and refract through these layers of different density, creating acoustic mirages that make distant calls seem closer, while nearby sounds fade into the atmospheric background. A great horned owl's voice carries from somewhere among the rocky outcroppings, its deep notes bouncing off distant formations and arriving from directions that seem to shift with each repetition. Wildlife becomes more active as conditions reach their optimal range for desert creatures. A kit fox appears briefly at the crest of a nearby dune, its silhouette delicate and alert against the star-filled sky, before it vanishes back into the maze of sandhills. These nocturnal hunters move with an economy of motion that speaks of perfect adaptation, every gesture calculated to conserve energy while maximizing the chance of finding food in this resource-limited environment. Their presence reminds you that what appears to be empty wasteland actually teems with life operating, according to schedules and strategies refined over millions of years. The quality of moonlight shifts as thin clouds drift across the lunar surface, creating periods of softer illumination that transform the entire desert into something resembling a landscape painted with luminous watercolors. During these moments, shadows become less defined, and the boundary between earth and sky blurs into a continuum of silvery light that seems to emanate from within the sand itself. The effect is profoundly peaceful, suggesting that the harsh divisions between day and night, heat and cold, life and death, might be less absolute than they appear from the perspective of ordinary consciousness. Plant life continues to reveal its nighttime transformations as specialized flowers begin their brief periods of nocturnal blooming. Desert 4 o'clocks unfold their trumpet-shaped blossoms, releasing fragrances designed to attract night-flying moths and beetles. The timing is precise, evolved over countless generations to coincide with the activity periods of their pollinators. These botanical events occur on schedules that have nothing to do with human timekeeping, following circadian rhythms that connect them to the fundamental cycles of the planet's rotation and the subtle gravitational influences of moon and sun. The sand beneath your feet tells stories of vast migrations and transformations that span geological ages. Individual grains may have originated in mountain ranges that existed millions of years ago, ground down by weather and transported across continents by wind patterns that have shifted repeatedly as climate systems evolved. Other particles might be recent additions, fragments broken from nearby rock formations by the extreme temperature variations that characterize this environment. Each step connects you to deep time, to processes that operate on scales that dwarf human experience, yet create the very foundation upon which all terrestrial life depends. Water becomes both memory and promise in this landscape, where moisture is precious beyond ordinary calculation. The slight increase in humidity that accompanies falling temperatures hints at the dew that will form before dawn, coating cactus spines and rock surfaces with droplets that many desert creatures depend upon for survival. Some plants have evolved elaborate mechanisms for harvesting this atmospheric moisture, turning their entire surface area into collection systems that channel every available drop toward their root zones. Watching these adaptations in action provides a masterclass in efficiency and resourcefulness. The horizon shimmers with infinite possibility in every direction, each distant formation promising new discoveries for those patient enough to seek them. Behind you, the dunes you've already traversed fade into atmospheric haze that softens their contours and makes even your recent passage seem like events from another lifetime. Ahead, fresh configurations of sand and shadow beckon with the quiet insistence of unexplored territory, each ridge hiding valleys and formations that exist in perfect solitude, until the moment conscious observation brings them into the sphere of human awareness. Moving through this ethereal terrain, you become increasingly sensitive to the subtle ways the desert manipulates perception and challenges assumptions about scale, distance, and the nature of empty space. What appears to be a nearby rock formation reveals itself to be miles away when atmospheric conditions change and visual references shift. Conversely, distant mountain ranges suddenly seem immediate and touchable as the air clears and previously hidden details emerge with startling clarity. The desert teaches patience with these gentle deceptions, demonstrating that truth often requires time and multiple perspectives to reveal itself fully. The night sky serves as both compass and calendar for those who understand its ancient messages. Constellations wheel slowly across the heavens in patterns that have guided travelers for millennia, their positions marking not just directions, but seasons, times for planting and harvesting, moments when certain animals migrate or flowers bloom. The Big Dipper pours its imaginary contents toward the western horizon, while Cassiopeia spreads her distinctive zigzag across the northern reaches. These celestial landmarks connect you to every human who has ever looked upward and used the stars to navigate across unknown territory. Temperature becomes an increasingly complex element in your experience as cooling continues throughout the night. The air develops distinct layers of different thermal properties that you can feel as you move through them, creating a three-dimensional map of heat distribution that changes constantly as energy radiates away into the infinite reservoir of space. Above, cool currents flow down from elevated areas like atmospheric rivers, pooling in depressions and creating microclimates that support their own unique communities of adapted organisms. Your skin becomes a sophisticated instrument for reading these thermal variations, detecting nuances that would have been impossible to perceive in less extreme environments. The creatures of the night continue their ancient routines with remarkable persistence and ingenuity. Somewhere in the darkness, a sidewinder negotiates the loose sand with its distinctive method of locomotion, each movement perfectly calibrated to provide maximum traction with minimum energy expenditure. Desert mice venture forth from their burrows to search for seeds scattered by recent winds, their movements quick and purposeful as they balance the need for food against the ever-present danger of becoming food themselves. These small dramas of survival play out continuously around you, mostly invisible, but occasionally revealed by careful attention to the subtle signs that mark the presence of adapted life. The interplay between geology and climate becomes more apparent as you traverse different types of terrain within this seemingly uniform landscape. Areas where sand mixes with gravel create different acoustic properties. Subtle variations in the sound of footsteps that speak to the underlying rock formations and drainage patterns that shape this region over millions of years. Exposed bedrock reveals itself through different thermal properties, radiating accumulated heat at different rates and creating localized air currents that affect everything from plant distribution to insect activity patterns. Night-flying insects emerge in greater numbers as conditions become optimal for their specialized lifestyles. A sphinx moth hovers near a blooming desert willow, its wings beating so rapidly they become invisible, while creating a barely audible humming that harmonizes with the gentle whisper of wind through narrow leaves. Beetles venture forth from daytime hiding places, their movements creating tiny disturbances in the sand that serve as signatures readable only by other members of the desert's nocturnal community. These creatures have evolved remarkable strategies for finding mates, locating food, and avoiding predators in an environment where resources are scarce and competition is intense. The desert's breathing becomes more pronounced as thermal circulation strengthens with the increasing temperature differential between cooling surfaces and warmer air masses. These gentle convection currents create updrafts that you can feel as subtle changes in air pressure against exposed skin. Invisible columns of moving atmosphere that sometimes carry the sense of distant ecosystems. A brief whiff of creosote resin from hidden washes miles away, or the mineral tang of exposed limestone formations, arrives as an olfactory message from places you cannot see, but that share this same vast canopy of stars. Your relationship with this environment continues to deepen as the night progresses, transforming from initial wariness to growing appreciation, and finally to something approaching reverence for the intricate systems that make life possible in such challenging conditions. What began as a journey through alien territory gradually becomes a homecoming of sorts, as if you're rediscovering capacities for awareness and appreciation that modern life rarely demands, but that remain latent within human consciousness, waiting to be awakened by contact with landscapes that operate according to more fundamental rhythms. The quality of silence reaches new depths as the night achieves its perfect equilibrium. Within this profound quiet, the smallest sounds become amplified and meaningful in ways that transform listening into a form of meditation. The soft whisper of sand grains settling after disturbance, the gentle exhalation of air from compressed surfaces, the distant contraction of cooling rock as it releases the day's accumulated thermal energy into the star-filled void above. These subtle sounds create a natural soundtrack that enhances, rather than disrupts, the overwhelming sense of peace that characterizes the deep desert night. Here and there, hardy plants reveal additional nighttime adaptations that demonstrate the remarkable creativity of evolutionary responses to environmental challenges. Desert marigolds release their stored fragrances into the cool air, creating invisible trails that guide nocturnal pollinators to sources of nectar and pollen. The 4 o'clock flower lives up to its name by opening precisely as afternoon heat begins to fade. Its timing so reliable that desert dwellers have used it as a natural timepiece for generations. These botanical clocks operate according to circadian rhythms that connect them to the fundamental cycles governing all life on Earth. The sand continues its endless redistribution through processes that operate simultaneously on microscopic and continental scales. Individual grains make journeys that might carry them thousands of miles over geological time, while massive dune systems migrate across landscapes at rates measured in meters per century. Some of the material beneath your feet has traveled from the Rocky Mountains, ground down by millennia of weather, and transported here by wind patterns that have shifted repeatedly as global climate systems evolved. Other particles are local products, fragments broken from nearby formations by the extreme temperature variations that define life in arid environments. As you reach the summit of another impressive dune, the panoramic view reveals the true scope and grandeur of this landscape. Sand seas extend beyond the limits of vision in every direction, their undulating surfaces creating patterns that seem to pulse with their own internal rhythms under the ever-changing interplay of moonlight and shadow. The overall effect suggests a vast ocean frozen at the moment of perfect turbulence, with waves and swells preserved in granular form rather than liquid water. Between the major dune fields, darker areas mark valleys and flats where different ecological communities have established themselves according to subtle variations in soil composition and water availability. The moon reaches its highest point in the night sky, casting the shortest and most defined shadows of the evening. Under this direct illumination, every detail of the landscape becomes clearly visible, revealing the true complexity of terrain that appears deceptively simple from a distance. The surfaces of individual dunes display their intricate textures, created by wind patterns from storms that passed through days or weeks earlier. Each grain seems to glow with reflected starlight, creating a carpet of tiny luminous points that stretches across the flowing terrain like terrestrial constellations spread upon the ground. Moving through this world of silver light and deep shadow, you begin to understand why desert landscapes have inspired spiritual seekers and contemplative traditions throughout human history. There is something about the combination of vast scale, extreme conditions, and profound silence that strips away the unnecessary complications of ordinary consciousness and reveals more fundamental aspects of existence. The desert becomes a teacher whose lessons are written in starlight and delivered through direct experience rather than words, offering insights that can only be understood through patient observation and openness to whatever wisdom the landscape chooses to reveal. The acoustic properties of this environment continue to surprise and delight as your hearing becomes increasingly sensitive to subtle variations in how sound travels through air of different temperatures and densities. Conversations between coyotes separated by miles arrive with remarkable clarity, their calls creating dialogues that span vast distances and remind you of the interconnected nature of life in this seemingly empty landscape. Meanwhile, sounds that should carry far seem absorbed by the sand and sparse vegetation, creating pockets of acoustic intimacy that move with you across the undulating terrain. Time loses its ordinary meaning in an environment where some processes operate on scales measured in minutes while others unfold over millennia. The exact configuration of sand and starlight you're experiencing has never existed before and will never exist again in precisely this form, making each moment simultaneously ancient and completely unique. Yet the fundamental patterns and relationships that govern this ecosystem have persisted for thousands of years, creating a sense of continuity that connects the present moment to deep time and suggests that individual experiences, however brief, participate in something vastly larger and more enduring than personal consciousness can fully comprehend. Fully comprehend. The desert's nocturnal transformation reaches its most profound depths as the night settles into its quietest hours. Here, in this suspended moment between midnight and dawn, the landscape achieves a perfect balance that seems to exist outside the normal flow of time. The cooling sand releases its stored heat in gentle exhalations that create barely perceptible currents of air, while the star-filled dome above provides just enough light to navigate this world of flowing shadows and silver-edged dunes. Moving across a particularly expansive flat area between towering sandhills, you encounter patterns that speak of wind systems far more complex than anything visible during daylight hours. Cross-currents have carved intricate geometric designs into the surface, creating natural mandalas that extend for hundreds of meters in perfect mathematical precision. These formations emerge spontaneously from the interaction of competing air masses, each grain of sand finding its place according to forces that operate beyond human understanding, yet create beauty that rivals any conscious artistry. The creatures of this nocturnal world continue to reveal their remarkable adaptations to life in extremes. A kangaroo rat appears briefly in your peripheral vision, its movements so quick and economical that it seems to teleport from shadow to shadow rather than run in any conventional sense. These small mammals have evolved kidneys so efficient they can extract every molecule of water from their food, never needing to drink in the conventional sense. Their presence reminds you that what appears to be lifeless wasteland actually supports complex communities of organisms that have found ingenious solutions to seemingly impossible challenges. Plant life displays even more sophisticated strategies for survival as the night progresses. Desert lupines that appeared completely dormant during the day begin to open specialized pores in their leaves, releasing stored moisture into the cool air in a process that helps them regulate temperature and attract night-flying pollinators. This precise timing demonstrates the intricate choreography that governs desert ecosystems, where every action must be perfectly synchronized with environmental conditions to avoid wasting precious resources. The quality of moonlight continues to evolve as atmospheric conditions shift throughout the night. Occasionally, temperature inversions create layers of air with different optical properties, causing the moon itself to appear larger or smaller, sometimes taking on unusual colors as its light passes through these natural lenses. During these moments, the entire landscape seems to exist within a vast cathedral of light, its walls formed by towering dunes, and its ceiling, the infinite expanse of stars that stretch from horizon to horizon. Sound becomes an increasingly important element in navigating this world where visual references can be deceiving. Your footsteps create different tones depending on the composition of sand beneath your boots, some areas producing barely audible whispers, while others generate soft cascades that flow down the faces of dunes like granular waterfalls. These acoustic variations provide information about moisture content, compaction levels, and the underlying geological structures that shape the surface topography you're traversing. The temperature differential between cooling sand and warmer air masses creates thermal currents that you can feel as subtle changes in pressure against your skin. These invisible rivers of moving atmosphere sometimes carry the sense of distant plant communities, brief olfactory messages that speak of hidden springs, rocky outcroppings where different species have established themselves, or vast expanses of creosote bush that extend beyond the visible horizon. Your nose learns to read these atmospheric letters, decoding information about ecosystems you cannot see, but that share this same night sky. Wildlife tracks become more apparent as your eyes fully adjust to the subtle gradations of light and shadow that characterize the deep desert night. The distinctive side-winding pattern left by a rattlesnake tells the story of efficient locomotion across loose surfaces, each curve perfectly calculated to provide maximum traction with minimum energy expenditure. Small circular excavations mark places where pocket mice have searched for wind-scattered seeds, their digging precise and economical in ways that speak of countless generations of refinement in resource extraction techniques. The horizon continues to shimmer with promise in every direction, each distant formation holding secrets that exist in perfect solitude, until the moment conscious observation brings them into the sphere of human awareness. Behind you, the dunes you've already crossed fade into atmospheric haze that makes even recent footprints seem like memories from another lifetime. Ahead, fresh configurations of sand and shadow beckon with the quiet insistence of unexplored territory, each ridge hiding valleys and formations that have never been witnessed by human eyes. Moving through this ethereal terrain, you become increasingly aware of how the desert challenges conventional notions of empty space and absence. What initially appears to be nothingness reveals itself to be incredibly full of activity, relationship, and meaning for those willing to observe with sufficient patience and attention. Every grain of sand participates in vast systems of circulation that operate on multiple timescales simultaneously, from the immediate rearrangements caused by momentary breezes to the continental migrations that unfold over geological ages. The night sky serves as both navigation aid and spiritual compass for those who understand its ancient messages. Individual constellations wheel slowly across the heavens in patterns that have guided travelers for thousands of years, their positions marking not just geographic directions but seasonal changes, optimal times for various activities, and connections to mythological stories that helped earlier peoples make sense of their place in the cosmic order. The North Star maintains its steady position while all other celestial bodies rotate around it, a reliable reference point that has remained constant through centuries of human wandering. Thermal layers in the atmosphere become more pronounced as the night deepens, creating conditions where sound waves bend and refract in ways that can make distant calls seem to come from entirely different directions. A coyote's song from miles away might arrive with perfect clarity, while seeming to originate from multiple locations simultaneously, as if the desert itself were singing through the voice of this nocturnal hunter. These acoustic phenomena add another dimension to the sensory complexity of the environment, creating an auditory landscape as varied and interesting as the visual panorama that surrounds you. The sand beneath your feet continues to tell its stories of origin and transformation through subtle variations in texture, color, and thermal properties. Some areas contain grains that have traveled thousands of miles from their source mountains, worn smooth by eons of transport through wind and water systems that have long since changed course. Other regions feature particles of more recent origin, fragments broken from nearby rock formations by the extreme temperature variations that characterize desert environments. Each step connects you to deep time and vast distances, to processes that operate on scales that dwarf individual human experience, yet create the very foundation upon which all terrestrial life depends. Plant communities reveal additional adaptations as the coolest part of the night arrives. Desert marigolds begin to release their stored fragrances into the still air, creating invisible trails that guide night-flying insects towards sources of nectar and pollen. The timing of these releases is precise, evolved over countless generations to coincide with the activity periods of specific pollinators. Some flowers open only during these brief hours, when temperatures drop below critical thresholds, their entire reproductive strategy dependent on this narrow window of optimal conditions. Water relationships become even more apparent as humidity levels reach their nightly peak and dew begins to form on exposed surfaces. Many desert plants have evolved specialized structures specifically designed to capture and channel this atmospheric moisture toward their root systems, turning the cool night air into a vital resource for survival. Barrel cacti develop microscopic droplets along their ribbed surfaces, while the spines of various species act as collection points that funnel precious water toward the plant's base through ingenious systems of channeling and concentration. Your own relationship with this environment continues to evolve as the night progresses, shifting from initial curiosity to growing appreciation, and finally, to something approaching reverence for the intricate systems that make life possible under such challenging conditions. What began as exploration of an alien landscape gradually transforms into a kind of homecoming, as if you're rediscovering capacities for awareness and appreciation that urban life rarely demands. but that remain latent within human consciousness, waiting to be awakened by contact with places that operate according to more fundamental rhythms. The quality of silence reaches profound new depths as thermal equilibrium approaches its nightly peak. Within this extraordinary quiet, the smallest sounds become amplified and meaningful in ways that transform listening into a form of active meditation. The gentle settling of sand grains disturbed by your passage, the soft exhalation of air from surfaces compressed under your weight, the distant contraction of cooling rock as it releases accumulated thermal energy into the infinite reservoir of space above. These subtle sounds create a natural symphony that enhances rather than disrupts the overwhelming sense of peace that characterizes the deep desert night. Night-flying insects emerge in greater numbers as conditions reach their optimal range for specialized desert species. A hawk moth appears near a blooming ghost flower, its wings beating so rapidly they become invisible while creating a barely audible humming that seems to harmonize with the gentle whisper of wind through the plant's delicate petals. These creatures have evolved remarkable strategies for finding mates and locating food sources in an environment where both are scarce and widely distributed. Their success depends on efficiency and precision that would be impossible to achieve through conscious calculation. The interplay between geology and climate becomes increasingly apparent as you traverse different microenvironments within this seemingly uniform landscape. Areas where sand has accumulated in different patterns create subtle variations in thermal properties, moisture retention, and wind exposure that support distinct communities of adapted organisms. Rocky outcroppings that seemed uniform from a distance reveal themselves to be complex geological stories written in stone, their layered constructions speaking of ancient seas, changing climates, and the slow but relentless processes that continue to shape the Earth's surface. Moving across terrain that shifts between firm sand and softer deposits, you notice how each area produces its own acoustic signature under your footsteps. These variations speak to underground water tables, different grain sizes and compositions, and the complex history of deposition and erosion that has created the current surface configuration. The desert becomes a vast musical instrument, each area contributing its own notes to a composition that changes with every shift in wind direction and temperature. The moon continues its stately progression across the star-filled dome above, and with each degree of movement, the entire landscape transforms once again. Shadows shift and reorganize themselves according to the changing angle of illumination, revealing new aspects of familiar formations while concealing others in pools of darkness that seem to extend infinitely into the night. This constant transformation reminds you that the desert's beauty lies not in any single configuration, but in its endless capacity for renewal and change. Wildlife becomes more active as temperatures reach their optimal range for desert-adapted species. Somewhere in the darkness, a great horned owl calls from its perch among weathered rocks, the deep resonant notes carrying across miles of open space with remarkable clarity. These apex predators of the night sky have evolved extraordinary hearing that allows them to locate prey by sound alone, even when hunting in complete darkness. Their presence at the top of the food web speaks to the complex relationships that sustain life even in this challenging environment. The desert's breathing becomes more apparent as convection currents strengthen with the increasing temperature, differential between cooling surfaces and the warmer air that continues to rise from thermal masses that accumulated heat throughout the day. These gentle circulations create updrafts that you can feel as subtle changes in air pressure, invisible columns of moving atmosphere that sometimes carry the sense of distant ecosystems far beyond the visible horizon. As the night reaches its deepest point, the desert achieves a perfect equilibrium that seems to suspend ordinary time and create conditions where past, present, and future become less distinct. Here, surrounded by silence and stars, and the gentle whisper of wind across endless expanses of sand, you begin to understand why this landscape has called to human souls throughout history, offering lessons about patience adaptation, and the kind of resilience that emerges from complete acceptance of challenging conditions. The stars overhead continue their ancient dance, and you begin to recognize the subtle shifts that mark the passage of hours in this timeless place. Orion climbs higher in the southern sky, while the Big Dipper slowly rotates around its celestial pole. These movements, invisible to casual observation, become apparent to anyone who spends enough time learning to read the desert's natural calendar. The night sky serves as both clock and compass, connecting you to navigation techniques that predate all human technology, yet remain perfectly reliable for those who take the time to understand them. Here, in this moment, suspended between the cooling of night and the promise of dawn still hours away, the desert continues to reveal its quiet magic through every breath of wind across sand, every shift of shadow under the wheeling stars, every subtle sound that carries across the vast silence of this ancient landscape that has been teaching patience and wonder to anyone willing to listen, since long before human footprints first marked its flowing surface. The desert's geological story unfolds beneath your feet, with each careful step across surfaces that have been shaped by forces operating on timescales that dwarf human comprehension. Here, where ancient seabeds have been lifted and transformed into rolling dunes, every grain carries within it the memory of distant mountains, vanished rivers, and weather systems that redistributed the very substance of continents across millions of years. The sand beneath you represents not just the end point of erosion, but the beginning of new formations that will someday rise as stone in places you will never see. Temperature variations create invisible architecture in the night air, layers of different density that bend light and sound in ways that challenge your perception of distance and direction. A formation that appears close enough to touch reveals itself to be miles away when atmospheric lensing shifts with changing thermal conditions. Conversely, distant mountains suddenly loom large and immediate as the air clears and previously hidden details emerge with startling clarity. These optical effects remind you that the desert operates according to its own rules, where conventional assumptions about space and time require constant revision. The nocturnal community continues to reveal itself through subtle signs and fleeting encounters. A ringtail appears briefly at the edge of your vision, its distinctive banded tail visible for just a moment before it vanishes into the rocky shadows from which it came. These secretive mammals have mastered the art of existing between worlds, equally at home climbing vertical rock faces or navigating the shifting sands of open dunes. Their presence speaks to the remarkable adaptability that characterizes successful desert dwellers. Plant life displays increasingly sophisticated responses to the optimal conditions that arrive with deep night. Century plants that have spent decades accumulating energy for a single spectacular bloom release their stored fragrances into the still air, creating aromatic beacons that can be detected by specialized pollinators from miles away. The timing of these releases represents the culmination of years or even decades of patient preparation, a reminder that the desert operates on schedules that have nothing to do with human urgency. The wind patterns shift again as the night progresses, creating new symphonies of sound as moving air encounters different obstacles and openings in the landscape. A cluster of weathered sandstone pillars becomes a natural organ as breezes flow through the spaces between them, producing haunting harmonies that seem to carry messages from some ancient civilization. These geological wind instruments play compositions that exist only in the moment, their melodies shifting and changing with every variation in air pressure and direction. Your footsteps create their own percussion against this backdrop of natural music, each step adding a small note to the larger composition of the desert night. Sometimes the sand responds with barely audible whispers as individual grains resettle into new configurations. Other times, it yields more dramatically, creating soft avalanches that flow down the faces of dunes with sounds like distant rainfall. These variations in acoustic response provide information about moisture content, compaction levels, and the complex history that has shaped each square meter of terrain. Moving across a stretch of hardpan where ancient floods deposited layers of fine sediment. You notice how the change in surface material affects not just the sound of your passage, but the thermal properties of the ground itself. This harder surface radiates heat differently than loose sand, creating localized air currents that support their own unique microclimates. Small depressions in the hardpan collect what little moisture is available, creating temporary gardens where ephemeral flowers wait for their brief moment of glory. The quality of starlight continues to evolve as the night deepens and atmospheric conditions stabilize. With no competing light sources for hundreds of miles, the night sky reveals layers of illumination that are invisible to most human observers. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon like a river of light, its spiral arms clearly visible as darker lanes of cosmic dust interrupt the stellar glow. Occasionally, a satellite traces its path among the constellations, a reminder of human presence in the vast emptiness that surrounds our small planet. Wildlife sounds create distant conversations that span enormous distances across the open landscape. A great horned owl calls from somewhere among the rocky outcroppings, its deep voice answered from a different direction by another member of its species. These vocal exchanges establish territories, communicate availability for mating, and maintain the social bonds that help these solitary hunters survive in an environment where resources are scattered and unpredictable. The conversations have been happening here for thousands of years, part of an ongoing dialogue between creatures perfectly adapted to find each other across the vastness of the desert night. The sand continues its endless circulation through processes that operate simultaneously on microscopic and continental scales. Surface grains skip and bounce in the gentle breeze, traveling perhaps a few meters before settling into temporary new positions. Meanwhile, larger patterns of dune migration unfold over decades and centuries as prevailing winds slowly push entire sand seas across the landscape. Some of the material beneath your feet has been making this journey for millions of years, traveling from source mountains through river systems that no longer exist to arrive finally at this moment when your footsteps disturb its temporary rest. Water relationships become increasingly complex as the night air reaches its coolest point and humidity levels climb toward their daily maximum. Dew begins to form on the spines of cacti and the surfaces of rocks, precious droplets that many desert creatures depend upon for survival. Some plants have evolved specialized structures that act as atmospheric water generators, their surfaces designed to maximize condensation and channel every available drop toward their root systems through ingenious networks of channeling and collection. The desert's breathing becomes more pronounced as thermal circulation reaches its nightly peak. Cool air flows down from elevated areas like invisible streams, creating currents you can feel against your skin as subtle changes in temperature and humidity. These atmospheric rivers carry with them the accumulated coolness of stone and sand that has been radiating heat into space since sunset, distributing this thermal resource across the landscape according to patterns established by topography and wind direction. Moving up the face of a particularly steep dune, you experience firsthand the complex physics that govern granular materials under stress. Some areas of sand support your weight easily, the grains locked together in stable configurations that hold firm under pressure. Other sections flow like liquid around your boots, each step creating small cascades that whisper down the slope behind you in miniature demonstrations of the same forces that shape entire mountain ranges over geological time. The acoustic properties of this environment continue to surprise as your hearing becomes increasingly sensitive to the subtle ways that sound travels through air of varying temperature and density. Conversations between coyotes separated by miles arrive with remarkable clarity, their calls creating dialogues that remind you of the interconnected nature of life in this seemingly empty landscape. Meanwhile, your own breathing seems amplified in the still air, creating an intimate soundtrack that moves with you across the flowing terrain. Night-flying insects emerge in greater numbers as conditions reach their optimal range for species that have evolved to take advantage of these brief hours when temperatures drop and humidity rises. A sphinx moth hovers near a desert willow in bloom, its wings beating so rapidly they become invisible while creating a barely audible humming that harmonizes with the gentle rustle of narrow leaves in the breeze. These specialized creatures have developed remarkable navigation abilities that allow them to locate widely scattered food sources in the darkness, using combinations of scent detection, star positioning, and other sensory capabilities that humans are only beginning to understand. The interplay between light and shadow creates an ever-changing exhibition of natural sculpture that demonstrates the aesthetic possibilities inherent in the simplest materials. Wind-carved rocks take on the appearance of abstract masterpieces, their surfaces polished by millennia of sandblasting, that has revealed hidden beauty in ordinary stone. Accumulated sand drifts create flowing forms that seem to capture movement itself, freezing the desert's eternal dance in poses that will exist until the next significant weather event reshapes them into entirely new configurations. Your relationship with this environment continues to deepen as the night progresses, evolving from initial wonder to growing understanding, and finally to something approaching reverence for the intricate systems that sustain life under such challenging conditions. What began as a journey through alien territory gradually becomes a form of communion with forces and processes that operate on scales both vast and intimate, connecting individual moments of awareness to patterns that extend across deep time and vast distances. The horizon shimmers with infinite possibility in every direction, each distant ridge holding secrets that exist in perfect solitude, until the moment conscious observation brings them into the sphere of human experience. Behind you, the dunes you've already traversed fade into atmospheric haze that makes even recent footprints seem like ancient history. Ahead, fresh configurations of sand and shadow promise new discoveries for those patient enough to seek them, each formation representing a unique solution to the eternal conversation between wind and gravity that shapes this landscape. Grain by grain, time loses its conventional meaning in an environment where some processes unfold over minutes, while others require millennia to complete their cycles. The exact arrangement of sand and starlight you're experiencing has never existed before and will never exist again in precisely this form, making each moment simultaneously ancient and utterly unique. Yet the fundamental patterns that govern this ecosystem have persisted for thousands of years, creating continuity that connects the present moment to deep history and suggests that individual experiences participate in something vastly larger than personal consciousness can fully comprehend. The moon continues its ancient journey across the star-filled dome above, and with each degree of its movement, shadows shift and reorganize themselves according to the changing angle of illumination. What appeared as solid formations an hour ago now blend seamlessly with the terrain behind them, while previously hidden contours emerge from darkness to reveal new aspects of the landscape's inexhaustible complexity. This constant transformation reminds you that the desert's greatest beauty lies not in any single vista, but in its capacity for continuous renewal and change. As the night reaches toward its deepest point, the desert achieves a perfect equilibrium that seems to exist outside the normal flow of time. Here, surrounded by silence and stars, and the gentle whisper of wind across endless expanses of sand, you begin to understand why this landscape has inspired contemplative traditions throughout human history. The combination of vast scale, extreme conditions, and profound quiet creates conditions where ordinary consciousness gives way to deeper forms of awareness, where the boundaries between self and environment become less distinct, and where the desert reveals itself not as empty wasteland, but as a teacher whose lessons are written in starlight and delivered through direct experience rather than words. The creatures of the night continue their ancient routines with remarkable persistence and ingenuity, their presence felt more than seen in this world of flowing shadows and silver light. A desert fox picks its way delicately across a patch of crusted sand, its enormous ears constantly moving to track sounds you cannot detect. These adaptations represent millions of years of evolutionary refinement, each feature perfectly calibrated to extract maximum survival value from an environment that offers few second chances for mistakes. Sound becomes an increasingly important element in understanding the complex relationships that sustain this ecosystem. The territorial calls of owls establish invisible boundaries across the landscape, while the scurrying of small mammals creates percussion patterns that speak of feeding territories, escape routes, and the constant negotiations between predator and prey that shape the nocturnal community. These acoustic signatures provide information about population densities, resource availability, and the overall health of ecological relationships that remain largely hidden from casual observation. The sand beneath your feet continues to tell its story of vast migrations and transformations through subtle variations in texture, composition, and thermal properties. Some areas contain grains that have traveled from the Colorado Plateau, worn smooth by centuries of transport, through river systems that have long since changed course. Other regions feature particles of more recent origin, fragments broken from nearby formations by the extreme temperature variations that characterize this environment. Each step connects you to processes that operate on scales that dwarf individual human experience, yet create the very foundation upon which all desert life depends. Plant communities reveal additional layers of adaptation as the coolest part of the night arrives, and optimal conditions allow dormant systems to become active desert lupines that appeared completely lifeless during the day, begin to release stored moisture through specialized pores, creating microclimates that attract night-flying insects and facilitate the pollination events that will determine next year's population. The precision of this timing demonstrates the intricate choreography that governs desert ecosystems, where every action must be perfectly synchronized with environmental conditions to avoid wasting irreplaceable resources. The quality of moonlight continues to shift as thin clouds drift across the lunar surface, creating periods of softer illumination that transform the entire landscape into something resembling a world constructed of luminous atmosphere rather than solid matter. During these moments, the harsh edges that define daytime desert terrain soften into flowing continuities that suggest the fundamental interconnectedness underlying apparent separation. The effect is both beautiful and profound, hinting at deeper truths about the nature of boundaries and the fluid character of what we usually consider fixed reality. The thermal currents strengthen as the night reaches its most profound depths, creating invisible rivers of cooled air that flow down from the higher elevations like atmospheric waterfalls. These gentle cascades of temperature carry with them the accumulated essence of stone and sand that has been slowly releasing its stored heat into the infinite darkness above. You can feel these currents as they brush against your skin, each one carrying its own unique signature of minerals dissolved from ancient rock formations, the green scent of hidden springs miles away, or the clean emptiness of air that has traveled across vast expanses without encountering any living thing. Moving through this world of flowing thermal layers, you begin to understand how the desert creates its own weather systems on scales both grand and intimate. The cooling surfaces generate downdrafts that interact with the warmer air still rising from thermal masses, creating circulation patterns that influence everything from the distribution of seeds to the hunting strategies of nocturnal predators. These invisible currents shape the very architecture of life in ways that remain largely hidden from casual observation, but become apparent to anyone willing to spend enough time learning to read the desert's subtle signs. The sand beneath your feet responds differently now as the temperature differential reaches its peak. Some areas that were soft and yielding earlier in the evening have developed a slight crust as moisture from the cooling air condenses and binds the surface grains together. Other sections remain loose and flowing, their thermal properties creating localized conditions that prevent this temporary stabilization. These variations create a complex map of texture and firmness that changes throughout the night, demonstrating how even the most basic physical properties of the landscape remain in constant flux according to forces that operate beyond immediate perception. Wildlife activity intensifies as conditions approach their optimal range for the specialized community of organisms that have evolved to exploit these precious hours of moderate temperature and increased humidity. A kit fox appears briefly on a distant ridge, its silhouette delicate and alert against the star-filled sky, before it melts back into the maze of sandhills and rocky outcroppings that provide shelter during the harsh daylight hours. These creatures move with an economy of motion that speaks of perfect adaptation. Every gesture calculated to conserve energy while maximizing the chances of survival in an environment where resources are scarce and competition is intense. The quality of silence continues to deepen, becoming not merely the absence of sound, but a presence that seems to have weight and texture of its own. Within this extraordinary quiet, your hearing becomes increasingly sensitive to nuances that would be impossible to detect in less pristine acoustic environments. The soft settling of sand grains disturbed by thermal expansion and contraction, the gentle whisper of air moving through the hollow stems of dead vegetation, the distant crack of cooling rock as it releases accumulated thermal energy into the vast reservoir of space that stretches beyond the visible horizon. Plant life reveals even more sophisticated adaptations as the night progresses toward its coolest point. Desert marigolds that remained tightly closed during the blazing heat now begin to unfold their petals, releasing fragrances that have been concentrated and stored throughout the day, specifically for these optimal hours when their intended pollinators are most active. The timing is precise, evolved over countless generations to coincide with the activity patterns of night-flying moths and beetles that depend on these aromatic beacons to locate sources of nectar in the darkness. The interplay between geology and atmosphere becomes increasingly apparent as you traverse different microenvironments within this seemingly uniform landscape. Areas where underground rock formations approach the surface create subtle variations in thermal conductivity that affect everything from dew formation to the establishment of plant communities. These hidden geological features reveal themselves through changes in vegetation patterns, variations in sand color and texture, and the different ways that accumulated heat radiates away into the cooling night air. Night-flying insects emerge in greater numbers as atmospheric conditions reach their nightly peak of favorability. A hawk moth hovers near a blooming ghost flower, its wings beating so rapidly they create only a faint humming that seems to harmonize with the gentle rustle of desert grass bending in barely perceptible breezes. These specialized creatures navigate using combinations of star positions, scent gradients, and other sensory capabilities that allow them to locate widely scattered resources with remarkable precision across vast expanses of seemingly empty terrain. And so, our quiet wandering through this moonlit wilderness draws to its gentle close. We have walked together across dunes that breathe with ancient rhythms, listened to the whispered conversations of cooling sand, and witnessed the desert's nightly transformation from harsh extremes to perfect equilibrium. In these hours of silver light and profound silence, the landscape has revealed itself, not as empty wasteland, but as a living teacher, offering lessons in patience, resilience, and the kind of deep peace that can only be found in places where time moves according to older, more fundamental rhythms than those that govern our hurried daily lives.